Mr. Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for convening this meeting, and my apologies, candidly, to our guest. The timing is not the best, but obviously it coincides with this tragic loss of the life of a vocal leader for human rights around the world. It strikes me that the balance that the United States maintains with China is an interesting one, that we might be, to a greater extent than perhaps in any era in recent history, rivals, and yet we're arguably codependent upon one another economically and globally. The paramount interest of our office, and I think my constituents based on my listening, is that there would be peace and stability, and that there be fundamental right to an opportunity extended to people in the 5th District of Virginia, the United States, and candidly globally. And so, and pardon me if I don't do service to Lo Xiaobo's name, but when a person of this magnitude exercises the moral courage which we've witnessed in this country through the statements and actions of people like Patrick Henry and Martin Luther King, Barbara Johns and Abraham Lincoln, it is indeed, as you say, something that should be taken note of by the world. While folks of my political ilk might sometimes find fault with some of the selections of the Nobel Committee, I think they could have found no more appropriate recipient than Lo Xiaobo. And one of the things that I've crusaded for as a member of the State House and now the Congress is a greater awareness by Americans of who Barbara Johns was. It was a 16-year-old girl who led a student walkout in Farmville, Virginia in the early 1950s, which really sparked the civil rights movement in Virginia, and did so at the imperilment of her own life and that of others, and did so at a time when, at a similar age, I was concerned with popping zits and whether or not I could get a prom date. And so sometimes I wonder what we do well here, what we can accomplish here. But to this end, I would say, Congressman Smith, gentlemen, folks in the room, that the more people we can get to go to Google and type in Lo Xiaobo's name and understand what he did in the face of the odds in which he did it, the more Lo Xiaobos there will be. I guess to the extent that we can help, I commend you on raising awareness and teaching about folks who we might not agree with on every single piece of subject matter, but who stand for fundamental truths that no one who is an American can deny, and that is that all people are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain rights. And so I suppose I'll take my time here to query both of you what, again, within the purview of the legislative branch of the United States federal government, we can do to ensure that his legacy doesn't die with his physical body, to insist that an important trade partner and member of the world community, China, understands that we give a damn, pardon me, and to encourage greater freedom and opportunity across the globe, and do so wherever practicable and possible without bombs and bullets and missiles and rockets, but brave men and women who are willing to stand up in the face of potential imprisonment or worse. So I'd offer first Mr. Genser the floor for suggestions. What can we do within the purview of Article 1 to help perpetuate the legacy of this great leader, to convey to our Chinese partners that we care, that we will not sit by idly as members of, say, for example, Falun Gong are imprisoned on the eve of what was supposed to be a meeting with U.S. leadership. What can we do to abate my fear that when spouses of imprisoned dissidents show up before this committee, they've only made their family's circumstance worse?
Well, thanks, Congressman Garrett, for your remarks, with which I fully agree, and your commitment to human rights as well. Let me just mention a couple of things that I think are important that the Congress could be particularly involved in helping. The first, of course, and most importantly, is to help get Liu Xia and her brother out of China as rapidly as possible. We need to restore access to them and then confirm their wishes and get them out. And that should be the top priority. And I think that pressure by having this hearing today, pressure by moving a bill that's focused on Liu Xia and her brother. We've also been talking about a private member's bill that would give them legal permanent resident status immediately upon arriving in the United States. These are things Congress can do. So that would be number one. Number two, Liu Xiaobo Plaza. Renaming the street in front of the Chinese embassy for Liu Xiaobo, I think, is a way that the United States and governments all over the world, and I'm sure we'll be campaigning for this for all countries in the world, to rename the streets in front of the Chinese embassy Liu Xiaobo Plaza. This is something that obviously has to go through the Congress and then go to the president for signature. Number three, justice and accountability, and I was just mentioning as well, having a list of those responsible for Liu Xiaobo and Liu Xia's deaths, to have the Congress advocating to have them sanctioned under global Magnitsky, and to make clear that this is why they're being sanctioned. And then let me just step back broadly and make a final point, which is something that I've spent my career as a human rights lawyer fighting for the freedom of prisoners of conscience. I spent 5 years as Aung San Suu Kyi's international counsel. I've represented more than 40 prisoners of conscience over my career and founded Freedom Now, my NGO, on whose board I sit, which has a full-time staff in Washington and London to work on these cases. One of the things I think the U.S. needs to do more directly, and I think the Congress could play a key role in a legislative context, is to focus our foreign policy on the world's prisoners of conscience, right? Because it seems to me that, we have annual human rights reports, and that's really good, and prisoners of conscience are kind of a narrow piece of it, but a more focused set of activities for the United States to focus on prisoners of conscience, because what we have found historically, and we were talking about a lot of different, obviously names, people like Havel, people like Mandela, is that the prisoners of conscience of today are the leaders of their countries tomorrow, and that for the United States to stand in solidarity with homegrown pro-democracy activists, not the United States imposing our values or our form of government onto others, but embracing those that within their own countries see the value of democracy, the value of human freedom, and to systematically, as part of our foreign policy, and engaging with every country in the world, any country that is persecuting prisoners of conscience, our engagement with that country, not just from the State Department or the National Security Council, but from every agency, can be focused on a list of names that would be raised, focused on training foreign service officers to do these kinds of things, focused on reporting requirements for the State Department about what's being done to help these people. What's interesting is that if you look at the case of Natan Sharansky, who of course was a Soviet dissident whose wife, Avital, met with President Reagan. A mentor of mine in my career, Erwin Kotler, was his counsel, and had a chance to talk to Gorbachev about why did you release Natan Sharansky. And what Gorbachev said was really telling, and I think really, really important, which was to say that, well, I didn't know who this guy, Natan Sharansky, was until and many years before he became the president of the Soviet Union. He was an agricultural minister of agriculture, and he came to the United States on some kind of agricultural exchange and discussion about, well, agricultural issues. And yet, on the U.S. side, our agriculture secretary raised to him Natan Sharansky's name in a meeting about agriculture. And one of the first things he did when he became president, he told my friend and mentor Erwin Kotler, was to ask the secret police, the KGB, for the file of Natan Sharansky, because he had heard about this in many meetings with U.S. government officials over and over and over again, and like, why is the agricultural secretary doing this? And he looked at the file and he's like, well, this makes no sense. Why is this guy in jail? And ultimately he was released. And so, to me, that's an important lesson for the United States, that prisoners of conscience and helping people of this sort isn't just the responsibility of some narrow assistant secretary for democracy, labor, and human rights to be raising, but that it has to be part and parcel and central to U.S. foreign policy as a strategic tactic to be regularly deployed to try to advance human freedom around the world. So let me conclude.
So to some degree, the Sharansky case was almost a ye have not because ye ask not. The attention was all it was. One thing that I was probably unintelligently voiced my frustration with, and I've only been here for a short time, is that I don't feel that we have synergy between the executive and the legislative as it relates to working together. I don't feel, sometimes I feel, and we've worked on the release of some prisoners of conscience, particularly in the southern Nuba Mountain regions of the Republic of the Sudan, and I almost feel like State Department wants to know why I care. God bless the good men and women there. I don't want to, but I mean, we should be working together to advance the same goals, and wherever any human being is held prisoner based on beliefs, unless those beliefs advocate violence against other humans, why can't we all agree on that, right? So thank you immensely, and I would love to speak to you briefly after the hearing about what you do, because I think we might be able to help to this same, I think, admirable goal. The only thing that I've been able to do in 6 months here that I can take pride in and take to my grave is help affect the release of individuals held because of their beliefs, right? It's hard to pass a bill, but when you tell somebody the United States of America is looking and cares about some formerly nameless individual in prison because of their faith or their actions of humanity towards another, and something happens, then you go, maybe this is all worth it. Thanks for what you do. Dr. Link, what else, within the context of the legislative role of, you know, the Article 1 constitutional underpinnings of this body, should we be doing that we're not doing? And by the way, I texted my legislative director during your comments to get us on the bill that is out there as it relates to the plaza. I just, Xiaobo Plaza. I'm wholly cognizant of my inability to properly pronounce certain things.
Let me add my voice to the chorus that says that the Xiaobo Plaza is a great idea. I really strongly endorse that. And also endorse what my colleague Jared Genzer said in some more detail about focus of foreign policy on prisoners of conscience. I think it's often perceived that we do that because it makes us feel better, and that's good. We should feel better. It's right to do the right thing, and we're better people for doing it. But what he's pointed out is that it's also an investment in practical terms in a better world, because these people that we're helping emerge, Havel did, Mandela did, Aung San Suu Kyi did, Liu Xiaobo can't, but there are more. It's a good investment from a practical point of view. I would add a third, which Jared sort of mentioned, but I would put it this way, and that's the bully pulpit is a good thing to use. It sounds like we're just pontificating, preaching, and so on, and that there might be backlash. But I think that's not right. Even the leaders, even the oppressors in China, at another level, know that democracy and human rights are a good thing. Watch the way they put the word democracy in their own rhetoric. Stalin, Lenin said they had democratic centralism. Mao Zedong said it was democratic centralism. North Korea, the most repugnant state on the face of the globe today, calls itself the Democratic Republic. There is a two-leveledness in the psychology of the oppressors. They want it both ways. Underneath, on the surface, the West is bad, the West's values are not universal, and they're oppressing us and so on, but I'm going to send my daughter to Harvard. Xi Jinping's daughter went there. Send them money. I'm from California. The Los Angeles area is full of communities that are built on money, probably corrupt money, shipped from China, that the privileged elite in China wants to ship abroad. They send their kids to go to U.S. schools more and more and more. So what does this say? Does this say that they hate Western values? No. It's a rivalrous feeling. And at one level, they say, we're all against you. But at another level, we're sending our children and our money to your country for safekeeping. So that gives us a platform on which to say, without apology, democracy, freedom, human rights are good things. And they may say on the surface, no, that's Western imperialism. Underneath, they know it's not. A lot of them know it's not. Therefore, I think what I've just called the bully pulpit, when our officials go to the G20 meetings, right, when they go to the United Nations or through VOA and Radio Free Asia, don't be embarrassed to put our values out there. There's more to them than the tyrants in China want to admit.
Thank you, Dr. Link. I would beg the chairman's indulgence for another question that's tangentially related and not directly related, but your comments have got the wheels turning a little bit. There is some call from various sectors to, in order to exert pressure on the Chinese, to exert pressure on North Korea, consider rolling back admissions of Chinese students to U.S. universities. My immediate reaction is that we don't have a Sisi in Egypt if there's not a period of learning and experiencing American culture, that we don't have any number of leaders abroad who've turned out to be pretty good allies if they hadn't spent time here in the United States. So there's back-end value to having the children, even of the Chinese ruling class, in American institutions. Having said that, the secondary argument is, you know, there is a rivalry, there is a need for engineers and software developers and expertise, and there is a competitive nature to it, whether we like it or not. And our institutions are producing the young women and men who are beating us at our own game, if you will. I would love your opinion on the idea that somehow denying access to our universities might advance goals as it relates to human rights and stability and safety on the Korean Peninsula, and as it relates to geopolitical stability and security, which might manifest itself differently based on the regions from which our excellent young students might matriculate. And this is an opinion question. There are no wrong answers.
As a broad principle, I would say that it's good for us to take the children of anybody, if they're smart enough to get through the universities and do well, and that the long-range effects of a U.S. education on the children of the Chinese elite is a good thing, and I work in a university. I make certain exceptions for that, though. About a week ago, a Wall Street Journal columnist named Bill McGurn called me up, and he asked me what I thought of targeting the offspring of the super elite in China and denying them visas to come to Harvard and Stanford and Chicago as a method of getting leverage for China to cooperate on North Korea. And I said, I think that's a good idea. So there's an exception there to my broader principle. And I would just say I make that exception because it's well known that we have no good options on North Korea. You know, if you bomb an attack, that's going to wreak havoc. It's going to destroy the city of Seoul. If you just do what we've done for the last 3 decades, which is to cross your fingers and hope for the best, that's not working either. What can we do? China, of course, can play a key role. That would be the way to really bring pressure on the North Korean regime. But China won't. I think the Chinese leadership likes their position of being able to waffle and have us constantly begging them to help, and they say they will, but then they don't, and so on. That's their end game. They like that. So when Bill McGurn asked me, is this a way to get the top leaders' attention in a very personal way, I said yes, and I would make that exception. Yeah.
Thank you. I don't want to, Mr. Genser, if you have any comments to that end, I'd welcome them. I don't want to freeze you out here.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Perry on this. I think as a strategic question overall, I think the more that we can expose foreigners to U.S. universities, the more that our system of government, the system, the free market, our values will be transmitted. But you know, you look at certain countries in the world who send their leaders send their kids to the United States, and you may have a different take on it. So, for example, let's take Iran, right? You know, it was reported in the media about a year and a half ago that the woman who was actually the spokesperson for the students who took the U.S. Embassy in '79, Masuma Ebtekar, who was referred to as Mary back then as the spokeswoman. Her son is getting his PhD in California, and she is the sitting vice president of Iran and the head of their EPA, and has been an unrepentant person with respect to everything relating to the United States and including her role in taking American hostages. Do I think it's a good idea to allow someone like that to have their child educated in the United States? Not really. My view is that while ordinarily I would never want to punish a child for the sins of their father or mother, in a case like that where the person is a sitting senior leader and is an unrepentant hostage taker, I don't think that we should be opening up our borders freely to people like that. And I would note as well that among my other clients are Siamak and Bakir Namazi, 2 American citizen hostages in Iran, 2 of 4 currently. And so Iran isn't just historically having taken hostages, but it is doing so today, and the current government of Iran, and in particularly the Revolutionary Guard Corps, are responsible for that. So it does seem to me that, that one needs to be smart about this and not just go with a big hammer and say, well, let's just not let people in. But I think that strategically the United States can definitely use access to our university system to send targeted messages in the right way and in the right time.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'll wrap up. So in conclusion, I would ask the yes or no question. The succinct summary of what you said is, if we target specific individuals and paint with a very narrow brush, that there can be an effective outcome. If we paint with a broad brush and essentially say we're not going to have students from country X, it's probably deleterious to our long-term desires.
Correct.
Yes.
Thank you guys immensely. And again, Mr. Genser, if you'll stick around for a little bit, I'd be grateful.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garrett. And I'll just conclude